Hey everyone, I'm Spiro Skentzos. I'll be the moderator for this holiday episode of Intro to TV Writing. Let's see, we've got a really great panel lineup today. It's being recorded by the awesome Greg Jones, head of TV Writer Podcast, partner of Script Magazine, and I want to get into our introductions and introduce you to these awesomely talented people who've taken time on their Sunday to come out and talk to us. And these are no correct order. Ted Sullivan is a TV writer and producer, currently a co-executive producer of Riverdale. Previous credits include Star Trek Discovery, Supergirl, Revenge, and Law & Order: Criminal Intent. He's also directed and produced videos for the 2008 Democratic National Convention, the environmental political action group Global Green USA, and fundraisers for the Performing Animal Welfare Society to rescue animals from private circuses and zoos. Please welcome Ted. Next is Helen Shang. She's a TV and feature screenwriter working primarily in genre and horror. She wrote on NBC's Hannibal, Showtime's The Man Who Fell to Earth, and Amazon's The Rings of Power. She is currently writing on the upcoming HBO Max show Welcome to Derry. It's a prequel based on Stephen King's It, and 2 independent feature films. What Helen loves most about conventions is seeing the incredible cosplay, and we'll have to see if there's any in this audience today. Next, so please give Helen a big round of applause. Next is Andrea Ciannavei. She is a TV writer, activist, and teacher in Los Angeles. She is currently a co-executive producer on a forthcoming marine project for Netflix. Past credits include Mayans MC on FX networks, The Path, American Odyssey, Copper, and Borgia on Netflix. Please welcome Andrea. And then we have Alyssa Clark, a writer, producer, editor with extensive production and post experience on critically acclaimed shows. She was co-executive producer on the Apple TV's show Servant. Her other writing credits include The 100, The Exorcist, and Sci-Fi's Dominion and Teen Wolf. She escaped her gun-toting, meth-making small town as soon as she could legally drive, and currently lives in Los Angeles with her partner, a blind dog, some jerk cats, and an impressive amount of bourbon. We have one more who is caught in the traffic melee outside, so Tanya will be joining us shortly. Just some housekeeping to start. It's a great panel we have up here, lots of experience. They've taken time out of their lives to talk to us, and we get to ask them lots of questions, which is great. Let's remember to get right to our question. And please don't reference your project's details if you're asking a question about something that you're writing. Like if you have a question about your own project, don't mention the details. And also a reminder that this is a spoiler-free zone. No Rings of Power questions. And our panelists cannot talk specifics about the shows for obvious reasons. And then for legal reasons, please don't pitch them or ask them to read your script. Just something I have to say. With that behind us, let's jump into it. I'd kind of like to take the pulse of the room to start off with. Who has written a spec script of an existing show in the past? Okay, great. And who is here because they haven't written one but is curious to how it goes? Great. All right, so we have some really people at a great period in their writing career. I think it'll be great for questions. How many have applied to writing programs? Okay, excellent. People who are consistently writing, that's great. All right, so there are 2 types of spec scripts that you can write. One is an spec of an existing show, or you can write your own original spec, original pilot. And we'll talk about both of these. The trend used to be usually you got to write a spec of a show to get started, and then it kind of became more of you have to have a spec and an original, and now I'm hearing it really depends on the showrunner, and this is the question that kind of gets polarizing on the panel is when you're reading material, let's say if you're reading a new writer or you're staffing a show or you're interested in getting to know someone, what are your thoughts on all that? Like what do you want to see or what do you want to read, a spec or an original pilot?
Yeah.
Okay. Might as well just jump on this one.
Closer to the mic.
Okay. I feel like there's great aspects about a spec of an existing show and also a pilot, because a pilot can help you see your original voice and the stories that you're passionate about. And a spec can really help for you to kind of learn how to emulate a tone of a show, because if you're going out for staffing on an existing show that somebody else has written, one of your jobs is going to be to kind of like add your voice into the mix of the show that is along the voice of the showrunner. So I feel like currently not many people, please feel free to correct me, are reading like spec scripts of existing shows to staff, but I think it's a great practice for you because that's what you'll be doing anyway if you're on staff for a show.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I've been working in TV for 10 years and have never been asked for a spec script to staff on a show. All of the fellowships ask for them, I believe. Still, it's part of their application process. I totally agree with Helen that no.
I think only the Warner Brothers.
Oh, okay. I stand corrected, but I do.
The Warner Brothers one wants just a spec script.
Got it.
They have a list of ones you can submit.
Got it. I mean, I do agree that in terms of like getting used to when you're watching a show, getting used to what the tone of the show is, what the world view of the show is, who the characters are, what are the sort of the conventions of the show. Like, do they use flashbacks? Do they use voiceover? Do they use any kind of other devices in that show? Like, getting used to seeing that and then writing within the confines of that, I think is a really good practice, as Helen mentioned. And because at the end of the day, when you are in a room, like, showrunners, in my opinion, or in my experience, like, they definitely want to know, like, what is your voice? What do you bring to the table? Because every writer who's coming to the table is bringing a particular expertise, for lack of a better word. But, like, when it comes down to when you're writing the outlines and when you're writing the script that's going to go to the studio and the network, the best thing you can do is to, as seamlessly as possible, step into the voice and the atmosphere of that showrunner and that show. And so it's both. To have both of those skills, I think, is helpful.
Yeah, ooh, that's louder than I thought. Yeah, I totally would agree with that. The one showrunner I know who does like specs is Javi.
Okay.
Javi loves to read a spec. When I would be staffing for a show or reading something, I would read either. I don't think I'd discriminate, because as long as it's well written, I understand the characters, I understand the plot, it goes someplace. I don't think I personally would discriminate. I think but the thing is, to get to the showrunner, you usually have to go through the network or the streamer or the assistant, and a lot of times they're just looking for original pilots. That just seems to be the thing that is. But I would agree, it's good practice, because when you get into the room, you need to, if you don't want to be rewritten a lot, depending on your showrunner, sometimes they rewrite all the time, or on like Servant, no rewriting at all. We just wrote our own things. It was amazing, you guys. You should try it. It was amazing.
Keeping on the theme though of specs, since Warner Brothers still has like a list of specs you should write for the program, if we can stay in the spec space for a second and talk about kind of the basic nuts and bolts involved in writing a spec and why they're so important. I know when I was getting started, it was great I would sit and watch an episode of TV and I would write down, okay, this is the beat of this, oh, here's an act break, we're going to commercial. Like, what is the value of writing the spec when you're starting out and what to look out for?
I think it teaches you the structure of a basic show. And so, and I, as everyone has said here, when you get onto a staff, the job is to do the show you are hired to write, not to make the show be the show you think it should be. And so when it's your show, you can make it be the show you want it to be. So it's whether you show the samples or not, you should keep writing them at home. I think it took me 3 samples to finally get to a sample that I thought was showable. I'm probably the oldest one here by a lot. So back when I was starting, you had to have a sample. So I wrote a House episode because I used to do medical research and I knew the medical jargon was going to be tough and all the characters had unique voices. Don't write an NCIS or a Law and Order, because they're all just giving expositional dialogue. You want to have a show that is difficult to write, that shows that you can get the voice and move on. And you should always be playing around with that until you're working regularly. Because it's great practice. And that's what you're going to do for, the first half of your career, is get hired onto a show and emulate a show that already exists.
And then you're going to work for free for a long time. It's weird.
That's also a good point too about what show to write and what show not to write, and to know the show. Like CSI probably would not do a musical episode, so you don't want, you want to make sure you hit the tone of the show, right? Like that's part of you understanding how TV works. Okay, so let's talk about original pilots then. How are they important and useful to writers? I know someone brought up a little bit about that earlier, just a few minutes ago, but any other thoughts on what's important about writing your own spec pilot?
I'll just say this. I'm in the middle of writing one right now. It's brutal because it is, it's a big void, and it can be anything. And so it's your job to rein it all in and to poke at it and not fall in love with scenes that don't work anymore. It's a lot harder to do an original pilot than a sample, but it's really nice when you get the jigsaw puzzle to come together. But it should reflect who you are as a person. It should have a point of view. It should not be bland. I wrote a very bland pilot once, and it was a fine structure, but at the end of it I was like, why did I write this? This is
To add to that, I think to where you're saying about what is important, to show that you can set up characters, characters that are compelling, not just in this pilot, but like you can see it moving forward. And I would say it's important to show that at the end of the pilot, the reader can get a sense of where the story is going. So these are all things that I feel is good for a pilot. And also, just to echo, like, I feel like this is an opportunity for you to write what you really love. Like, this is the story that you're passionate about. You're going to be living with it for such a long time because there's so much more setup to do than if you're writing a spec, which has existing characters and existing storylines that you're building off of. So, like, yeah, like really a big chance for you to tell that story.
I think the biggest piece of advice I give when I read people's pilots is set up the story like it's going to be a series, but tell the story in the pilot. Don't save your best stuff where you're like, but in episode 2, you can make that stuff up. You can hire a room to do that. The pilot I have gotten all my jobs on is called On Darker Shores. And I wrote it really quickly. It was one of those things because I'd written a bunch of bland stuff. I'm sure yours was not that bland. And then I was like, I knew there was a TV show called The Exorcist that was going to come out. And I looked at my stuff and I said, I don't have a horror pilot. And I love horror. It's what I do. And I was like, why don't I have that? So I mean, in my head, I sat in my room with like a glass of whiskey and I like came up with this amazing idea. That's not what happened. But I said, I love Lovecraftian. I came from a small shitty town. I'm gonna make a Lovecraftian small shitty town kind of horror story. And so it was what I loved and what I hated at the same time. And that's what's really worked for me. But after my first draft, what I really went back and did is I made sure at the end of that pilot, it hinted, it had a good like, what's gonna happen in season 2, in episode 2. But you got the story in episode 1. So many of people I know write that they're like, yeah, but I can't wait to see what you see after. And this is your chance. This is what you're going to get. They're going to read that sample, and that's what's going to happen.
A question off of that, because you kind of alluded to it, is like you wrote something that's kind of personal, like it's based on your growing up, where you grew up. And talk to us about how, like, what does write what you know really mean, and how important is it in your writing sample and you're showing your personal experiences?
So I wrote a pilot recently called Life Support, and it was optioned by Universal Television. We're taking it out in January. And the main character is a middle-aged black woman, and I am not obviously a black woman, I am middle-aged. But I wrote that the story was about a woman who doesn't really want to live, and her job is to help people as they're dying. And it's a comedy. And so it's like, and like, there are elements in the story that were totally came from my life or from my experience or certain moods that I get in sometimes. And I just took that as a springboard. Like that's where I'm coming from with this show. So I think that like the beating heart of the pilot is the thing that I know emotionally. That doesn't necessarily mean that every character in that script is something that, or someone that I am, or they may be people that I know and met and have crafted. I also have people read my scripts to make sure I'm not shit in the bed. You know, like there are things that I do, like I have to be aware of what my blind spots are, and there are many. But I think that for me, like, write what you know, that can be anything. That can be material, that can be emotional, that can be psychological, it can be financial. All of those things play into it. But I get a little skittish around, like, well, there are certain stories that clearly I should not be writing, like historically, like it would be vastly irresponsible. But I get a little skittish about, well, you can't write that character because you're not that character. Like that kind of, I feel like that is a double-edged sword that cuts everyone who tries to wield it. So yeah, I'll just leave it there.
No, I think that's great, and I love that script, as you know, and I can't wait to see it on a series.
Wait, Spiro, I was going to say, so
Yes.
just what she said, of having people read sensitivity reading. If you are writing a disabled character and you are not personally have that disability, have somebody you know or find somebody to read it just to make sure that you're getting it right. And that's true with technical stuff and everything else too, but it's always good to have a lot of different eyes to give you some hints. Like, and I like to write about cannibals. I have not been
talk later, then.
proven to be a cannibal, but you know, you gotta.
The write what you know does not mean literally like I got up this morning, I had a cup of coffee, and then I ate someone. But
It's not a breakfast cereal.
it's not a breakfast cereal. So I forgot what I was going to ask next now. But both of the scripts that you've mentioned so far that you've been writing that are original, how important are the first 10 pages of these? Like, you're getting into a new story, you're trying to bring someone in. We always hear about the first 10 pages. What do those mean to us? So what is that? How do you interpret those? That rule.
Everybody's looking at me. I guess I'll answer that. I think the first 10 pages are important in really showing the reader that you can write, and I think it's like, I would have a sense of the character and a sense of where the story is going, and also the tone of the piece that you're working on in the first 10. I also get skittish if people say, like, oh, in the first 10 pages you must have this, by page 3 you must have this, because I don't think that every project is a paint by numbers. And also it's different for if you're writing to act breaks, like for a network show, the first 10 pages would be different than if you're writing for a streamer show, which would have like a different rhythm to it. I would just say, like, this is your first chance to make a first impression, like making sure that you can take care of all the things that are easy to fix, like typos, like inconsistencies in formatting. These are things that you can very easily fix, and to just show that you care about the material that you're presenting out.
I'm going to just add to that because that's all really good advice. I will also say that the reason why people put an emphasis on the first 10 pages is a lot of times showrunners only read the first 10 pages. So if your best stuff is happening on page 40, the showrunner's not going to see it because just a lot of times they just go like, I got an idea of it. So you want to just front load some really grabby stuff to try to make people see, like, this person knows how to paint an image, this person knows how to set up an issue, but also this person knows how to introduce a character. So like your pilot, like that's what I'm wrestling with right now in the pilot, that everyone except the main character has this great introduction, and I gave it to some people to read, and they're like, yeah, but like why is this person doing this? I'm like, shit. Right. Main characters are boring. Yeah. No, they're not. But so think about your introductions. Think about what is your first image? What is your first scene? The first scene should kind of set up the whole issue of the series that you're going to be tackling. If all that stuff is clear, then people will go, oh, this person knows what they're doing. This person knows how to break a story, introduce a character, and write dialogue. That's what the first 10 pages. When people are really saying that, the real ugly secret is most people don't read past the first 10 pages.
And it's not just the showrunners you're getting through. You're getting through assistants. You're getting through studio executives, network executives. All those people will have to read those first 10 pages and be like, all right, I can pass this along.
And network executives are reading while texting and watching something else.
Yeah. I mean, what Ted said, it really is the quality of writing for me. Like when you have. So I know for a recent show, not the show I staffed, they read 300 scripts. Very picky showrunner. And really, it's that the first 10, and if he likes the first 10, he'll read the whole thing, and then he'll nitpick through there. But it's the quality of writing. It's just the flow of it, the introduction of that main character. I do think main characters are often boring when I write them. I like all the side characters, and then the main character's like, I'm Luke Skywalker, and I'm whining. And I have to...
Think of some power converters
Yeah.
at Toshi Station.
And then, yeah, so that's my personal problem. Write a cool main character, and then you don't have that problem. Mine always suck, and then I want to write side characters. Yeah, I know.
The thing that I'll add to that is that when I first came to LA in 2014, I had worked as a freelance writer on 2 shows before then and had never staffed, so I had no idea what staff writers did in a room, because I would just get outlines and get sent off for 3 weeks, and then that was it. So when I staffed in a room, I was like, holy shit, I have no idea what I'm doing. And like, because in college, like, they didn't teach you like ABC storylines, and these are the act breaks, and here's how you write an outline. Like, that was just not told. And so I had to learn by getting thrown into the deep end of the pool, like, repeatedly. And so I actually I used to teach, and when I taught, I was like, this is how you're going to learn how to write your pilot. I don't care if it's a spec, I don't care if it, like, you are going to learn ABC storylines, you're gonna learn how to write beat cards, you're gonna learn how to weave them on a board, because this is 90% of your job as soon as you get hired in a room. That's what you're gonna be doing. So I'd rather have any writer walk in having experienced that pain already than having to learn it for the first time in a room. But in any case, when I staffed in that room, there was like a supervising producer was like, I was like very angsty, and she was like, why don't you just go take a writing class that has 0 to do with like TV or film? Just go take a like nonfiction narrative something. And I was like, that's a really good idea. So I like signed up for a writing class, and it was like write a memoir or whatever, or like, you know, whatever. It was like nonfiction narrative. And so I was reading other people's writing, and I was writing essays, and it was like fairly rigorous. And what I noticed was that made my language in the action lines of my scripts much tighter. You start to learn how to tweak your sentences on a very annoying, like minuscule level, and it makes you into a crazy person, but it's completely worth it, because then you don't have 5 lines of a paragraph on a script, because that's part of the problem that I kind of like, that sort of rubs me raw, is like when I read a script and I see paragraph after paragraph describing stuff, and you can pick it out, it's like, it's cool shit, but it's so heavy. So like learning how to command your language in a very muscular way makes for the reading process, like you want a showrunner, you want anyone who reads your script to be unable to put it down. Like, no one's gonna be like, oh, let me get a cup of coffee, I'll come back for page 15. You want them to just keep reading it because you've made it so easy for them. And that I got from taking other forms of writing. So that's just my pitch for like, what makes a good pilot to me is like, go be free, go write other kinds of things, and then come back and see how it speaks to your screenwriting or your television writing, because that is in conversation. Even a poetry class, seriously.
That's a great point.
I want to say one thing about that. Poetry, exactly. Script writing is not like any other form of writing. I actually don't really tend to like reading scripts. I love reading good scripts. A lot of them aren't, for the reason you're describing. But it's not writing a novel or a short story or even a play. It's writing a haiku. So you're trying to find sentence fragments. You're trying to create. It's brush strokes. It's not like carving out of marble. It should be light and easy and fast read.
Until you get to your production draft, and then you have to like put everything in, because they'll ask you questions of like what color blue and what the buttons look like and all that. But that's different. That's
What door do they walk through?
Yes.
Another thing I just thought of is like, you're not just getting through the hoops of the executive or the producer. You're getting through people like me. I went through NBC's Writers Verge program. I got accepted to that, and afterwards they asked me to read for them, and so I did 2 years of reading, and it was a lot of scripts came in, and it was chunks on one page of action. And now that I'm further along in my career, and I also teach at Script Anatomy, which Tanya created, but Tanya's not going to make it, I don't think. I'm finding, like, I'm talking to students, I'm like, you can't do that. Like, no one is going to read an entire page that is single-spaced of action line describing what's happening. It needs to be what you've just spoken about, which is Spartan, really, I think is a good word for that. All right, so we're going to do Q&As. Anyone has questions? We'll do that in a sec. Also, a reminder, per the conversation about who can write what, I'm on the steering committee for Think Tank for Inclusion and Equity, and we put out a group of fact sheets for underrepresented groups. You can go to writeinclusion.org, and you can look up the fact sheets. And if you are writing about people who are kind of not in your group, who are usually underrepresented people, you can find out storylines that have been told and that are not healthy, and and also storylines that would be great to see more of. Just as a side note for you all. All right, questions?
No, wait, hold on.
Oh.
It's not could, you should. Like, go read them. It's such a bad-ass group. Like, Angela and you and everybody, such a diverse group, and they've really put a lot of thought. We did a whole series at the Education Committee of panels of people talking about, and they're doing more all the time. And you guys, it's such a good resource. Please look it up and support that.
It's a great group, and I don't mean because I'm in it. It's just a great group.
You do make it
it's good work done. All right, we have time for Q&A. So you, and then Blue, and then front row. Yes.
Sorry, I said a kind of two-part question. I was wondering what your relationship with your rep was like during staffing season, like how that teamwork kind of worked out. And when you finally got staffed, what was something that you wish that you knew that you would give yourself?
Okay, I'll repeat just since so we can make sure everyone here. What is your relationship like with your manager during staffing, and when you got staffed?
When you finally got staffed, what's something that you wish you knew?
What was something that you wish you knew? Yes.
I love my agents and my manager. I can't even believe I'm saying that, but I do. I've been with my agent for 12 years and my manager for 6. What happens is if I hear of things or I have questions, I email them. They usually tell me like what they've been doing, or I ask them. Actually, my manager, what he does, or when I was staffing, is that he would give me a grid. So it was like a list of all the shows that are going to be greenlit, whatever, everything in between, and then like it has a graph of like who are the executives, who's the showrunner, do I know anybody any names on that spreadsheet, and I would either say yes or no, or I feel like I'm right for this show, or my sample's good for this, and then there'd be other rooms where I was like I would shit the bed in that room, please don't put me in it, I would be a terrible waste of time. But so it's very communicative, and it is about me telling them like I know these writers, these are the people I feel comfortable like sort of putting things in their ear, like just getting a sense of the relationships, and so that's been the deal. Lately, like I went over the grids last year, and I called my manager and I was like, am I crazy, or does it feel like super like skinny slim pickings? And he was like, it is not great right now. And so I was like, it feels like that, and then of course it's gotten to be what it is right now. But I tend to like, well, we could talk about that too, but I tend
Run
to
away and get a different job is what she's saying.
get many jobs. But I do, unless, I don't know, like for me, I have to present myself in every relationship with assuming good intentions, because if I don't, it just ends badly for me, like just for myself. So I don't know, my relationship with them is pretty good. What was the other, the thing I'll answer the second question really, like, I wish I knew about beat boards and how to write them succinctly. I wish I knew about storylines when I first went into a room. I didn't understand how you pitch story in a room. Getting to like the highlights of your pitch as opposed to getting into the play-by-play. Like, when your friend is telling you a story that's gone way too long, don't do that. And so like learning that thing, I literally had no clue. So I wish I had known that, and also pay your fucking taxes. Don't mess around with the money. Like, what they tell you your rate is every week is not your rate. It's minus commission, minus taxes. Like, you are not balling, so do not.
This is a whole other panel.
But it's true. No, those are the true things. Because listen, the way that you write is if you take care of your business, if your money is straight, if you're taking care of yourself physically, emotionally, and spiritually, you will be able to write. If your life is a crisis, you will not be able to write. Trust me, I've lived this. So that's why, those are the really important things to me, I think, too. Anyway.
That's great. Thank you for that. That's great. So down the line, if any of you want to talk about your relationship with your reps, so you know why I'm laughing.
No, I have a good relationship with my reps, but I like to answer the second part of your question, which is like what I wish I had known going into a show. And like, I say this without irony, like, I wish I had known like the insignificance of your role as a staff writer. Like,
Yes.
I thought going in, oh my God, the world is on my shoulders, like Hannibal season 3 is gonna like rest on me. It does not. Your job, like, people know that it's your first show, your first or second show, and I think people are looking for, cool ideas that you have, like if we're working on a scene, it's like, oh, what's a slightly better way to get from like, the house to the train, and you're like, what about this? Like these moments, and if somebody I would remember a staff writer if they came up with like a cool pitch that kind of like solved a little problem that we had, but definitely not like the overarching like big dramatic and I feel like if I had known that earlier, perhaps I would have taken it slightly easier on myself, because I don't know about you guys. I would have a little bit.
Yeah,
We're
But-
all overachievers.
Yeah.
You would have been beating your head.
I feel like a tiny little bit, but like, I mean, I wonder if it's the same for you guys about the.
I will say 100%. What you're saying is 100% accurate. I think what I always try to mentor the junior writers. I don't call them baby writers because I think that's a bad term. Don't use that term.
It fucking pisses me off.
Exactly.
I have a whole thing.
I tell junior writers to say one good thing in the morning, one good thing in the afternoon, and the rest of the time, write the cards, because no one wants to write the cards. You learn a lot from writing the cards, and listen and watch what pitches work and what don't. Because really, what I wish I knew was the hierarchy of the writer's room. So I didn't know that there was staff writer, story editor, executive story editor, co-producer, producer, supervising producer, co-executive, and so that's like the military. You move up, you get a promotion, and no one blames co-producers and below for a show getting canceled. They don't even really blame producers or supervisors. Co-producer to producers, like the sweet zone. Yeah. Like you make more money, you have a little bit more responsibility, but not a lot.
Not a lot.
And you never get blamed for the show getting canceled. But once you get up to co-EP, or you're a number 2 or something like that, it sucks. It's the worst.
I'm learning.
Yeah, I hate it. It's awful.
You want to be number 3 on a
Yes,
show.
number 3 is great. And I will also say I have no agents. I never had a good agent. I hated my agents. They never got me a job. I always just gave them 10%. I always got the job myself. When we fired
Testify.
our agents, I never went back to an agent. So I just have a lawyer.
I didn't either.
Yeah.
I have a manager, but I didn't go back to my agents. I liked them. They're nice guys. But, well, mine was...
They make 10% off.
I hugged them at a wedding last
As
week.
you can see, the agent question runs the gambit.
I like my managers very much.
Alyssa, what did you wish you knew when you wish you knew?
I wish... another showrunner said this at a WGA thing, and I can't remember her last name, so I'm not going to... But she said, you will always have another idea. And that, I think, is what I, like, oh my God, I have this one great idea. And the showrunner's like, nah. And then you're like, that was my one idea. That's it. I'm done. I might as well leave. I'll never have another good idea. You'll have, once you get to the rhythm of the room, you'll have 25 ideas an hour. And you'll do this. Okay, guys, this is going to be totally stupid, but, and then you'll say it, and then it will solve that tiny little thing that's actually huge because it spent 2 hours doing it. Like, I have a friend, and Spiro has a friend named Miranda Kwok, who has an amazing show on Fox right now, and Miranda would just come, she's like, this is so out of the blue, this is from space, I know it's going to be terrible, and she would say it, and we'd all be like, yes, on the 100, it's all plot, just all these little plot things, and you think like, oh, I could totally do that. That's the hardest part, I think, is coming up with all those plot solutions. And so you always have another idea. You know, I know some ideas seem like the best, and you're like, that showrunner's stupid, that would have been cool. Trust me, I know. But you'll have another one. I think that's what I wish I kind of knew going in.
That's a great one, too, to wish to have known. So, great, thank you, good question. You had a question back here. Before we do, Helen, can you pull that mic down, and we can, since Tiny's not going to make it, we can move. Yeah. All right, what was your question?
I was curious about with streaming and kind of the different services we have for television now, if you're seeing both spec scripts and as well as like TV scripts in general, if you're seeing like a structure change with them, or like if you're seeing a length change, and if there's like where do you see
So the question, for those who couldn't hear, is about the difference between how scripts look now that we're in a streaming world, like the difference between a network script to a streaming script. What's the difference in structure or storytelling, right? And how it might continue to change.
I'm just going to say really quick, because I worked on a half-hour horror show, which are not very many. So Servant was a half hour. So that was a completely new kind of world for me, because I'd only ever, it used to be comedies were a half hour, dramas were an hour. That just doesn't work that way anymore. So if you have a half-hour horror, you think it would fit better in that. And I was skeptical, but it's easier. And you don't get paid as much, though. Yeah. But it actually turned out to be great. A show like Servant, which is just very melodramatic, big characters all the time, just packing it in and having to get a plot into a half hour. I think it really taught me a lot. So I would say don't be, if you are doing a script, it's still people want to read, unless you're writing a half hour, people, which should be about 35 pages to 40. But people don't want to read anything over 65, and they probably don't want to read anything under 40 if it's an hour. Like, try to hit your 45 to 65, I think, for anything you're writing. And don't worry about act breaks if you have something that but if you were like, I love an act break, then write to an act break. I think do you.
What I would say, like friendly addendum to that, what I would say is like my life support pilot is 37 pages. And we're taking that out as a mixed tone comedy. So that's what it is, until someone says otherwise. And then I'm on a show right now for Netflix, and we have to come in around 55 pages. And my showrunner at first was like anti-act break, and soon was like, let's do the act breaks. Yeah. Even just for like the purpose of breaking the story. It's not in the script, you know what I mean? Yeah. So I would say for like people like trying to staff or whatever, if you don't want act breaks in your script, fine. Just use them while you're working on the draft, and then take them out. Because the reality is that people have been watching television since the 50s, so they have a certain, they've been trained, right, to consume story in a certain way. So there's a kind of rhythm and cadence to the storytelling that they're expecting. And so to hold yourself accountable, to make sure you're hitting those like act breaks, those act outs, just put them in there so you know like your first act should not be 25 pages fucking long, and if it is, it's too long. You gotta fix it. Yep. So that's what I feel like. That's the best use of your time with that, and not to sweat it too much, you know. But it
does help you write for sure.
I've worked on a show. I've worked on Hawaii Five-0, which is with lots of act breaks.
I'm sorry too.
It was a great learning experience of writing to proceed. No, I really liked it. I think it was like okay. And then I've worked on Rings of Power, which is more serialized, and the difference in the room so like in Hawaii Five-0 was more like modular stories. It was like you're working on an episode and you're working on an episode and you're writing to the act break, and what we mean by that is like this is when the commercials happen, so you kind of have to leave on a hook to get the viewer to come back. Mm-hmm. And when you're streaming, there's often no commercials, though now it's starting to come back, so people are starting to come back with the act breaks. So like for Rings of Power, what we did was like we looked at the season more as a whole as opposed to just like very, very modular. So but we looked at each episode like as individually and like, how do we end an episode in a way that would make a viewer come back? But that I think was the kind of like a big difference in the way that we approach these different types of formatted shows.
I think what everyone's saying here a little bit is one of the things that I've hated about streaming is that there seems to be an emphasis on the opening thing that happens and the final cliffhanger, and then there's 45 minutes of just dicking off.
You don't like White Lotus? Sorry.
And I think if you're writing a streaming script, whether you're hired or whether you're writing it to get hired, tell a complete story with a beginning, middle, and end. Don't be like, well, then the next thing, because it's a lot of just this happened, this happened, this happened, and this happened. So have a point to the story. If you can make that happen, it doesn't work. It doesn't matter if it's with act breaks or if it's for network or for streaming. Tell a story, because why I get bored by a lot of streaming is you can just see like they don't have a story that they're telling. They're just telling incident.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because I was actually just going to ask that off of your initial question. Is I've been like we learn beginning, middle, and end. That's a pilot. And I teach, when I teach script anatomy, like you can't have a cliffhanger. But then you go to Netflix, any sort of streaming show, and you find this initial thing like, oh, that's interesting, and then nothing happens. And there's no pilot goal. There's nothing to drive characters to action. And I think that might be something that he is alluding to in the question. And that's a choice that like Netflix and those streamers are making, but I don't think for someone who's going out with a script that that's what you want to do. And I think that's what you're saying, correct?
Yeah.
It's not what I want to watch either.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just my personal preference.
Next question.
Yes, hi. My name is Bella. I'm in the screenwriting program at USC.
Cool.
Oh.
I'm one of the
Undergrad or grad?
undergrad.
Filmic writing?
Pardon?
Filmic writing?
Yes.
That's what I did too.
Oh, wait, sorry. Yeah, I'll pick it up. But currently our program is focusing a lot on writing the screenplay specifically.
Yeah.
And I know for a fact I want to go into something after this. But I'm finding it really hard to shift from generating ideas for these more finite stories with a complete character arc to pilots, where it's like, hey, this has got to generate ideas for the complete rest of the series. Do you have any advice for that shift specifically? Because I know limited series are now coming into their own, so there is opportunity for a finite post-character arc. But obviously, like for a spec strip, that's not necessarily what you want to do.
So you're talking about the difference, the trouble of going from a feature which is finite to the series script, and the difference between those, which I think what's lacking is the engine, right?
Yeah, it's the engine that's going to keep it going. But once again, if I was reading for a show, I'd read a screenplay too. It might be too long, but if it was badass, then I wouldn't care if you had that ability to do that, as long as the screenplay had a good beginning, middle, and end. So if you had a pilot, if you were like, I'm going to take the screenplay, I have done this. I had a screenplay, and I have recently turned it into a pilot. And I took kind of the first act and then pieces of the other acts that I thought would tell what's going to happen. And I think actually it was more successful than the feature. So I have done that. So because we always had too many characters. We always had too much going on in that screenplay. So that's the kind of idea that goes for, I think, for a TV show. Is if you have a screenplay, you're like, I have too many ideas. It's now a TV show.
I think one thing that helps me is to think about your main character having two wants at the same time that they can't have, right? So Walter White wants to be a good man and a good father, he says. He also wants to be the kingpin, you know what I mean? And you can't have absolute power and be a family man at the same time. It doesn't, you know what I mean? So we watch him for 7 seasons go from one extreme to the other. When the business is good, his family's falling apart. When his family's good, the business is falling apart. And he pings, and we'll watch that forever. And you see how the showrunner and his brilliant fucking team, like, basically structured like this ladder of escalation over the 6 or 7 seasons, where he goes from being like a chemistry teacher to the top, and every like sort of main bad guy that he has to like surmount in every season. So you when you're creating your show, you kind of have to think about like, okay, what does my main character, what are the 2 things that they want that they can't have at the same time? And it's like, it's a spiritual soul thing with them. And then sort of like, after that, just sort of looking at the sort of 30,000 foot view of like, what is their trajectory? Like, how far can this go, you know? Or if it's set in a town, if it's Orange is the New Black, it's about 10 women stuck in prison. There's not a lot of places they can go physically, but we want to see their relationships. We want to see like, how will they get out, you know? Like, how do they grow? Do they devolve, you know? Like that sort of thing. I feel like that's really, that could like open a door for you, I think.
Yeah, that's great.
To add to that, and I think it's essentially what you're saying is like, I would say to have a sense of conflict at the end of the pilot, like, because conflict is what drives story. And I'm writing a screenplay now, so I understand, like, at the end, you kind of have to have a denouement, like, you know, wrap things up, not like fully, but you know, like give a sense of closure, which is something that you don't want to do fully at the end of the pilot. Like, you know, in a procedural pilot, yes, you solve the case, or you know, House solves the crime, or the medical issue, but like, there is that conflict with the character. Like, you know, House is an asshole, and he's now like, but he's like such a great doctor. So now he's going to continue to be in the hospital, but be at odds with the other people. So like, I think that sense of conflict will help.
And just what I would suggest doing, because I used to only think in features because I went to USC film writing, and and that's all they cared about. And especially back when I went there in the dark ages, TV was like just like the dog shit. You know, it was the 90s. It was 90210. So we write samples like of existing shows, and it will train your brain to think like writing TV scripts as opposed to watching movies. And what I did was I was obsessed with Buffy, so I wrote a Buffy. And then I was, and then I was like, well, I like comic books, and it was pre-comic books coming back, so Smallville was the only thing. So I wrote a Smallville. And then I wrote, I just kept writing. I wrote a 24. I wrote just to watch an entire season of a show to just dissect, and you've been talking about this. Why does this work? Why does it not? The more you write in the format of what you want to do, the easier it will become, and then the more your ideas will be geared towards that medium. Because it's exercising your creative brain in a different way. And just expose yourself to a lot of TV, and then think about what you watched and why did it play out this way? Why did it work? And also watch bad TV.
Yeah.
I feel like I learn more from watching bad shit than I do from good shit. Like when I watch Lawrence of Arabia, I'm like, I don't know why this works. It's great. But if I watch, Battleship Earth, I go, right, don't do that.
But it's actually good, and even if you have a show that you really like and there's a bad episode,
Yeah.
and then sit on your couch or your chair or whatever afterwards and rewrite it in your head. And that'll ruin TV for you, but it will make you a better writer,
I think we have time for one more question. Yes, here.
So I'm curious about the workflow in the Riverdale writer's room. I have a lot of time where online I'll spend time with some friends and we like brainstorm and we comment about stuff we love. And I ran into a problem of where I can get lots of people to like explore ideas and have fun, but you can't get a volunteer to actually write it all down. I'm wondering, are there tools that you tend to work with? Is there a workflow that seems maybe?
So you're talking about how do writers' rooms work and take the notes and the practicality of all that, which I think is a writer's assistant. But do you have other
Yeah, so I've been in Zoom rooms. I don't know, has
yeah.
anyone got, so I've been in a Zoom room since the pandemic began, basically. And so I use Writers Room Pro. I tell everyone to use it. There's other tools out there, Miro, there's a bunch, so you find the ones that you like. I like Writers Room Pro. And we do also have a writer's assistant. But the writer's assistant is like busy taking like, oh, they pitched this line, this line, this line. You still need to have somebody like writing what is the beat of this scene in this card, and then maybe putting some details underneath it to like sort of jog your memory. So that in terms of like retaining the information, like that's how we really do it. So there's the room notes from the writer's assistant, and in my case, I'm a co-EP, but I'm doing the cards because nobody wants to do the fucking cards.
No one.
And I'm literally telling them, I'm like, it will make you a better writer. It'll make you understand the show more, and nobody like they're just not interested.
It's
in it.
good.
Yeah.
It's really,
And it keeps your mind engaged. And I
Yeah.
have terrible handwriting, and they have to try to read it, but it's good for
true.
you.
And I think if anyone is out there, like if any of you like have sometimes if you're in like long meetings where people are talking and you have a tendency to get distracted by your phone, or you start thinking about the shopping list that you have to get done or whatever it is, doing the cards helps you stay present in the moment and listen to what the fuck is going on so that your pitches are better. Like it all goes to the thing. It's like if you know the guts of the show that your showrunner's trying to like put together, then you're able to like sneak in there with like helpful suggestions.
There was one more question over
Spiro,
here.
can we let her?
Yeah, up here. Yeah, here and then there. Let's try to get them in before we get kicked out. Go ahead.
So how important is pitch material when you're staff?
That's a good.
Pitch deck, do you care about the pitch deck when you're staffing the show, or should you save that for how?
So the question is, how important is a pitch deck when you're on a show?
When you're staffing.
When you're staffing.
No pitch deck.
Yeah.
It's literally a meeting to talk about your person, like to see if they think you're crazy.
But I will say one caveat to that is if you're like when I went into Law and Order, I went in with 9 potential cases. And I only got to pitch one because the first one I pitched, they were like, "Oh, that's what we want to do," and then I was hired.
And to be clear, it was just a verbal thing.
It was
nothing
just a
you had
verbal
to-
thing. There's no pictures, there's no nothing, because you also don't want to look like you're trying too hard. Because in this industry, and this is the most frustrating thing about this damn industry, the more you want it and the more they know you want it, the less they'll give it to you. So when you act a little bit like kind of too cool for school, and you're like, yeah, this show's pretty good. Yeah, whatever. Then they're like, oh my God, I want this guy.
Yeah, it sucks.
It sucks.
And then the question was back here, right? When you're breaking a story, you're given an assignment. How much support do you have when you're looking, if you have a trouble with it or
I
something?
feel like we had a trauma response up here.
It depends on the room. I will say, on Revenge, it was the best room I've ever been in.
Yeah.
Like, everyone in that room, like, if it wasn't their episode, they were treating it like it was their episode. I've also been in other rooms where I'm up at the board and I'm looking out, and everyone's just doing this.
We don't have phones. We didn't have phones in the 100 room, and I loved it. A good room, you'll have all the support you need, and you should be able to go to any writer, and you'll have your favorite people, and you should be able to go to the showrunner too, and the writer's assistant, and everybody. Like, I've been really lucky to most of the time. I think the majority of writers I've ever worked with have been fantastic, and would love to sit and just talk story with you.
Agreed. I recently worked on a freelance project, so it was a little different. The room was very, very short, and then it's like, you go off to do your own thing. So it was a lot of breaking that you had to do by yourself. But luckily, the showrunner was great. So there were some moments that I was like, is this working? So I would call him up, and that worked.
That's
She
great.
had
Where's the other one?
question right here.
Question? Yeah. Let's get it in before we get kicked out.
Should I be concerned about writing an original pilot that's playing in a space or a genre that's too niche to be of general release? Like, for example, if I'm writing a high fantasy pilot or a kid's show, and the person who's reading it is like staffing for Bridgerton, is there a risk of being like, oh, that's not really
Oh, so this is about what type of pilot should I write? Is it going to be too niche in its tone or its genre for someone to read and consider me for staffing?
If you could pick a show right now you wanted to write for, what would you write for? Okay, then write a fantasy.
Yeah.
And because you may not get on Rings of Power, but there's going to be other fantasies. Do what you love.
Yeah.
I love sci-fi and horror, and I have comedies and stuff, but that's not what I'm going to get hired for.
But also, if you love Bridgerton too, like
Yeah.
you could be like, then go write a pilot that would like
Yeah.
fit that genre. You know what I mean? You want to kind of cover your bases, but yeah.
I would say don't worry about it being too niche. Like it's about your passion, it's about your voice. So for Rings of Power, the thing that was submitted was not high fantasy. Another writer, he had written a pilot about like some like shipping dock story. It literally was what the showrunner's looking for. Like, are they looking to see if you can world build,
Yes.
like certain types of worlds, character? It is not like it's not a one-on-one. Like, yeah, a person who would be running a fantasy show oftentimes would not just be like, I'm only going to read high fantasy
absolutely
and
not.
nothing else. No.
They want to look for they have playwrights who just
Yeah.
we want people who understand character.
Yeah.
But if you love fantasy and that's what you
Yeah.
want to write, then write it. Like, I think it's kind of like write what you love.
Absolutely, because that's the thing. Like, if you don't love something, thank you. So if you don't love your characters, if you don't love your world, it will 100% be evident on the page. If you love your characters, if you love the world, if you love the thing you're exploring, and like that also conversely shows up on the page.
And it's the only thing that's going to keep you alive in this industry because it's going to kick you down and try to throw you in the hole and just beat you
on that
with
positive
sticks.
note. Right, go ahead.
Always good. Yeah, I wrote a pilot about the election of 1828. So it's like no, that doesn't fit for any show. But Andrew Jackson,
Basically,
John Quincy Adams.
write what you know, write what you love, but just keep writing, I think is the theme for the panel today. So please give our panelists a big warm applause. Thanks for coming out today. And thanks to you all for being here.